So, hi Jeff, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Can you see the room now?
I can. Hi, everybody.
Good enough? Anyway, you've got a fresh and perky audience here, and we are looking forward to hearing you. Thank you very much for doing this.
Great, Thomas, my pleasure. Should I speak for about 15 minutes maybe and some Q&A if there's interest?
Yeah, absolutely. There will be interest, and you can also speak for a little longer if you like.
Okay, great. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you. Thanks very much for the chance to be with you. I want to talk about the general issue of mobilizing resources for sustainable investment, and especially mobilizing resources for the Sustainable Development Goals. We have a global agenda. We have a globally agreed set of goals and targets in so-called Agenda 2030. I think it's a meritorious set of objectives which go to the core of ending poverty, expanding healthcare access for universal coverage, expanding education access for universal coverage of schools from pre-kindergarten through secondary education. And of course, we also have the commitments on the environment, especially the Paris Climate Agreement, which is incorporated into SDG 13. I take that agenda to be the proper framework, national global action for sustainable development. And I ask the question every day, how are we going to actually achieve those goals? And the basic answer is by directing our resources to the right areas. We need to expand financing and access to health and education. We need to guide investments in hospitals, investments in renewables. We need to ensure proper job training and so on. We need to build infrastructure, particularly in low-income, middle-income countries, and especially in the rapidly growing cities in those countries. What's the total bill in order to accomplish this? Of course, nobody knows because we don't have really a proper analytical counting of what it would take to achieve sustainable development. But my estimate is that, speaking of incremental investments, on the order of about $3 trillion or $4 trillion a year, covering the entire world economy. That is relative to a world economy of approximately $1 billion a year. So we're speaking of roughly 3 or 4% of world output being shifted from either bad investments, oil exploration, or from consumption into the right kinds of investments in health education, basic infrastructure, environmental conservation, renewable energy, and so forth. That is clearly, if those sums are even roughly right, and I believe they are, amounts of resource mobilization that are within our reach, because they constitute roughly 3% or so of world output per year, which is not a crushing burden for us to redirect from consumption weak investment spending towards the higher priority objectives. That's the positive side. The negative side is that mobilizing that finance is a political as well as economic challenge. Part of that funding, at least a few $100 billion a year, is needed by the low-income country. A lot of that needs to be income that essentially is right now found in high-income countries. So transfers in some, or compensation, or that are not available to low-income countries. You no doubt have noticed that we are in the age of conspiracy. We're in a period where wealthy elites virtually around the world dominate politics in most of the countries. And so mobilizing these resources for the needs of poor people or for the environment, the United States is really extraordinarily plutocratic. Now, the whole fact that we are entering another round of tax cuts on corporate income for the richest people in this country at a time of big budget deficits and big social needs is an indication of how warped and corrupt the United States is. Plutocracy. Trump is
censorship. This is censorship.
We've not found a way to stop them, to resist this pressure. So this is, for me, the great drama. Can sustainable development, or
Jeff, can we reconnect for a second, because we have a little bit gaps in your speech. Can you call us?
He did call.
Or we call you?
Yes.
So we try
We
him.
tried connecting to a different network.
And yeah, maybe the network could be the problem.
Yeah, if it's on the guest network,
The person whom you're trying to reach is currently unavailable. Please leave a message after the beep.
Hi Jeff, sorry, we had a bit of an audio problem.
okay. How is it now?
In the moment it's perfect.
maybe we can take the video off.
All right, let's try it again. I actually plugged in the Ethernet cable this time rather than depending on wireless.
This sounds a lot better actually, even the sound quality is a lot better.
Let's take the video off.
If you turn off your camera on your side,
Okay, you've seen us.
not that I'm in the room, but you have to for me to let me know if you can't hear me.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks.
So I was saying that I don't know, I'm not sure where I was.
You're just like Donald Trump.
Where it was hard to hear me, but I was saying that we need to find roughly $3 to $4 trillion a year of redirected assets, and yet we're in the hands of really a plutocracy, which is dead set on cutting taxes further for the richest people in this country, cutting social programs still further, avoiding all responsibility on the environment and so on. So there is an overarching political economy question, and that is whether there is any way to tame the economic juggernaut of our super wealth holders in this country and worldwide. I don't know the answer to that. have not very effective politically, almost anywhere. And if you think about the number of autocracies, it's not only the U.S., but many countries. Brazil is a case in point. South Africa is a case in point. And there are a number of others where, and Putin's Russia, where corruption is rampant, where the elites dominate, where the investments in the poor are meager, where the resources for sustainable development are not properly directed. So mostly this is a political struggle. And so in that context, there are a number of options, both technical and political, of how to win. I actually don't think that we're going to win this battle. There's a lot of activism and mobilization of poor people in the world. You look at our political challenge in the United States right now with this tax bill, for example. I don't watch TV, so I don't really know, but I don't believe that we're hearing the voices of poor people in the United States at all. There seems to be no mobilization. We barely even hear the voices of Democrats, much less poor people. So there's very little social mobilization. There are not marches in the street about billionaires about to take $3 or $4 trillion of tax revenue away from the federal government. There's no activism. And without activism, we're not going to this battle, unfortunately. So I'm not in a good mood or very optimistic right now about this. There are several different categories of resources one might have a target on, and I know we were talking about illicit flow. I guess the point I would make about illicit flows basically is that they are not extra systematic flows. The illicit nature of these flows is part of a structured system by and large. So it's not really outside of politics and that when the government's cracking down. These illicit flows are government supported to a very important extent. Government officials, official corruption, powerful interests aligned with governments and so forth. Similarly, there are issues of better contracts for natural resources. There's a tremendous amount of continuing exploitation of Africa by mining companies, and the contracts are not adequate, but this is again pretty raw politics, both at the national level and internationally, because typically the big, powerful extractive industries work in the United States and China, backed up by their own government. So this is a matter of foreign policy, not just a matter of commercial policy. There is, of course, an estimated $20 to $30 trillion of assets held in tax havens. How to get to that? Many of those tax havens are UK, US possessions. Again, they're there by design, they're not there by accident. The British Virgin Islands or Bermuda or the Cayman did not develop as tax havens out of their initiative. They developed as tax havens out of London and Washington, so this is pretty tough. Official development assistance is continuing to be at a crisis level. The United States development aid is about 0.7 of 1% of U.S. GDP. Roughly a quarter of the 0.7 of 1% of GDP official target, and Trump and Matt had their way, it would go down to zero. So ODA is a very tough area. And then I'm interested in vis-a-vis ultra high net worth individuals in the world. There are two different definitions you might look at. One is the billionaires. You can look at the Forbes list of billionaires each year. Right now, there are 2,000 people on that list, and their high net worth as of last year was $7 trillion. This year it will surely exceed $8 trillion for those 2,000 families, so that's an average of $4 billion per household. They by themselves could solve most of these problems, at least for the poor. But of course, most of them don't have the slightest interest right now in doing so, or the slightest engagement. So my view is we absolutely need to address the high net worth. The second category of ultra high net worth is $30 billion, $30 million net worth above. And in the most recent study of ultra high net worth that came out just recently, the estimate is that there are 226,000 ultra high net worth individuals with a high net worth of $27 trillion. So I am interested in mobilization of ultra high net worth funds where the billionaires at $8 trillion of net worth, even 1% of it would be $80 billion a year. And I'm about to want to meet with some partners on calling on all billionaires to give at least 10% of that year for the Sustainable Development Goals, backed up by a global campaign for a net worth tax on billionaires of at least 1% per year to be introduced in the early years of the next decade. This is, a political and moral quest. I don't know the chances of success, but it's something that I'm about to launch. And if anyone is interested in launching that, joining that campaign, I'd be grateful to hear from you. I think that we really need to go right now straight to the plutocracy itself with the demands for social justice. When you go to the governments, you have two problems. One is the government that are just front for these powerful individuals, so you're going through an intermediary. And second, the government themselves have basically given up their tax revenues to an extent, and so they flee poverty because they have cut the tax for the super rich. So I think a campaign directly on and about the super rich, either you have the social responsibility to do it, or we're going to snap you taxes, is something that's needed. I think probably hundreds could decide to contribute on a voluntary basis. Others are going to have to be controlled, pressed, bought in order to do so. But that's actually the area some of my interest in the coming couple of years. And I would really welcome suggestions and especially participation and activism by any of you who would be interested, and you can contact me directly about that. So those are the brief remarks that I wanted to state in the opening. We're not winning right now. In fact, we're losing. We're falling backward. What's happening in the United States is disgusting, but it's also indicative of what's happening in many parts of the world. And the plutocracy is very powerful. It's internationally mobile capital. They have lots of friends in high places, or they're directly in high places themselves. And we have a real fight on our hands. Thomas, back to you.
Great, Jeffrey. Many thanks. And maybe I'll start you off with a question. You talked a good bit about where the money would come from, but you said very little about how it would be spent. Do you imagine that to be in a decentralized way, that governments have more money that they devote to development purposes, or do you think that there should be some sort of teamwork, supervision, just to make sure that the money is spent effectively on poverty eradication, rather than appropriated for all sorts of extraneous purposes? So I think this would help also in overcoming some of the skeptical arguments that are often voiced, where people say, this is a wonderful idea, in theory, $3 trillion could solve all the world's problems, but if you actually had the money, it would flow into the pockets of the fat cats in one way or another, and it would do very little good.
So, of course, if you dissect the $3 trillion, there are many, many different things in it. A lot of that $3 trillion is the energy sector. And it's basically building a low-carbon energy system. That has to be done essentially in a complicated mix of private investments and level investments and national scale investments, international and regional grids. So the energy sector, which is probably $1 trillion of the trillion, is an entity in and of itself. It's basically a requirement of countries to live up to the Paris Climate Agreement and to mobilize resources to do it. Within that trillion, there is a component of maybe $100 to $200 billion a year that should be transfers from rich countries to countries to enable them to face the climate challenge. We created funds like the Green Climate Fund and the Global Environment Facility in order to help facilitate meaningful, sensible transfers of climate financing. But those mechanisms are not properly resourced. So I would properly resource climate funding to establish norms of cross-border financing to meet the criteria of transparency, direct efficiency, accountability, and so forth. There's another category on climate finance, which is called losses and damages, which is what should be compensation from the carbon emitters to the losers in this process. And I'm very interested in a continuing suite of lawsuits by governments around the world against the oil companies to collect on losses and damages. And I'm working with some legal teams also to help launch some new laws, because I think that this is a case where the polluter pays principle should really apply. When it comes to issues like universal access to health and education, then we need different kinds of mechanisms for financial transfer and accountability. And my favorite such mechanism in the last 15 years has been the Global Fund to Fight AIDS and Malaria, which was an institution created in 2001 and started in 2002 to channel funding from governments in the high-income world to low-income governments for fighting the epidemic. And that has proved to be quite successful, not only in actual practice against epidemics, but in the accountability of the funding. So it's allowed a decentralized use of money, but through a centralized mechanism that has provided guidance, technical review, and oversight. And I have tried for the last 2 years to try to engage the government to establish a global fund for education that would be like the Global Fund for peacekeeping and over. I have not succeeded because of all of the political challenges that I've mentioned. But I'm encouraging the African governments to establish on their own a fund for African secondary education, into which international counterparts, whether it's billionaires or the Brussels or bilateral donor aid, would pool their funds into one transparent funding mechanism on which African governments would draw to bolster their budgets in order to be able to implement secondary education. So the answer to the question, Thomas, is we need a lot of institutional innovation, not one mechanism across many sectors, different parts of the world. And it is part of the mix when you cajole money or undertake activism for money. You have to propose a meaningful institutional way that money should flow. In the case of education, to my mind, it is a kind fund, like the Global Fund that might keep them over, whether for the world or based in trying to over it now.
Any other?
Money.
Yeah, the question is how can we ensure that the SDGs are financed, because there are too many goals, too many targets, and very few resources from other sources of financing, and definitely the dear donor are not interested anymore. They are kind of broke. Thank you. What's your feedback?
Great, thank you very much. The SDGs are a complicated agenda because they span economic development, health, education, infrastructure, social inclusion, and environmental sustainability. And that's why there are 17 of them. The agenda is good, but it's complicated. And therefore, creating a financial framework for them has not been done. At a rhetorical level, governments are somewhat committed, at a political level, but not at a financial level. Development assistance is not adequate, and there has not been any financial for the SDGs since they were adopted in September 2015. So your question is completely valid, does not have an answer. That's a good answer. My job as advisor to the Secretary General to try to answer your question. And I find myself within a quite complicated, burdensome, and uninterested system to try to mobilize an answer for answers by engaging different parts of the system, the health community, the education community, the infrastructure financing, the multilateral development efforts, the climate financing, trying to come up with answers that are specific in each of these areas. That's what I think we really need to do, is to take the big picture and then parcel it out region by topic so that we can come up with more meaningful answers. But we need activists, rich people who do not want to give up their money. They are insatiably greedy. They are relentless in trying to get more money, and they need to be bought, not happen.
Good. We have time for one more question, if there is one. Don't be shy. Yep.
My question is why...
Get the microphone. Can you come up forward and you can... Then Jeff can hear you better.
So my question is why do you think that the arms trade is completely lacking from the SDG discourse?
I'm sorry, why do I think the what is?
The arms trade, because it's causing most of the problems or a lot of problems in the developing world, and it seems that it's completely avoided in the SDG discourse. The governments have not committed into controlling or reducing arms trade.
The
Arms trade.
Weapons. Weapons trade.
Oh, weapons
Trade in weapons, yeah.
Oh, weapons trade.
Yes.
Hey, my country loves weapons trade. Didn't you see that idiot president of ours when he went to Saudi Arabia? And the only thing he was interested in was signing $100 billion of weapons trade. And he said, jobs, jobs, jobs. Because these people are sick. That's why. Because they make a lot of money on weapons trade. So this is a huge problem. Saudi Arabia, by the way, needs funds. Its oil prices are low. It's trying to get out of the oil economy. It's in a region that is destroyed, needs to be rebuilt. Yemen needs to be rebuilt. Syria needs to be rebuilt. And what are they spending their money on? Weapons. Because they dream of war with Iran. This is the craziness of our world. So the reason it's not in there is the United States is the number weapons trade. We're not the only one, but boy, do we love our weapons. So you need to raise your voice, Jen. We are living in a period where a lot of horrible things are taking place in front of our eyes, and we need the moral discourse and the activism to fight. That's the basic point.
Good, so I'm happy to say we have arms trade on the agenda here for the conference on Sunday. And we also have tomorrow Julia Olson here, who does the trial of the century, maybe you know, 21 youths suing the US government about their rights.
Absolutely, I've been a little bit part of that earlier on, so that's tremendous. That's a very important case.
Good, so thank you very much, Jeff, for being here with us this morning. And you gave us a wonderful start to the day, and hope you will come again and join us next year, maybe in person.
Of course. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a million. All right.